This is something that, again, now we have to look back and notice that it's inserted into the Enlightenment itself, which is that, the Enlightenment says we are free individuals and we have individual rights. And those individual rights, are God-given. At the beginning of the Enlightenment, there are two visions. There's one which is that we are free individuals, and the state has to kind of be as least involved as possible, and we have to be able to kind of reach our free individual desires in order to be happy. And then you have another vision, which is that no, people are crazy and violent and dangerous, and so you need the state to control them. And those two things actually are playing against each other. The rainbow coalition stuff that's happening, that's the end of the Enlightenment, folks.
Morning.
Good morning. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. So my initial thoughts on this conversation were to talk about postmodernism and how it's affecting, how it's evolved in our society up till the present. I interviewed Professor Stephen Hicks a number of months ago. I don't think I've released that video yet. Well, I know I haven't. But some of the comments were that maybe I could talk to someone else about it and see if they had any. And my husband suggested you. So here we are. But I'm always thrilled to talk to you. So
yeah, it's nice to see you. All right, sure. I'd be happy to talk about postmodernism. I think I understand several aspects of postmodernism.
Okay, let's talk about those things then.
Yeah, sure. And so, What is it about Stephen Hicks that, like, what is it that prompted the desire to talk about it, or what provoked it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I studied sciences in university. I stayed away from everything that was changing at the university because there was some political correctness and things starting back in the 80s, and I just stayed away from it and I tried to avoid it as much as I could. And so I've never really paid as close attention to it, even though Jordan has been, going down that path for a very long time. I didn't have anything to do with it. And I thought it was my responsibility to pay attention and to learn more about it. So I thought, okay, I will learn as much as I can. And so I interviewed two people on postmodernism. I interviewed a fellow who's known on Twitter as Vocal Distance.
Yep.
Yeah, I interviewed him a couple of times. And the first time I interviewed him, the video didn't work. It was just audio. And I had to listen really carefully, because it was audio. And he explained what he thought was postmodernism. And at the end of it, it made me feel sick. It made me feel like I was not attached to anything. I couldn't hold anything. I wasn't standing on anything. I was not supported at all. And it felt very destabilizing. And I thought, oh my God, is that what postmodernism is? That's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. And so that was my initial introduction to it. And then since then, I interviewed Stephen Hicks, and he gave me the Enlightenment. He gave me the historical conversation the timeline of postmodernism. And so I imagine that you'll give me something else.
All right. Well, we'll see what I can give you. I think I've said this a few times. I think Stephen Hicks doesn't understand postmodernism very well. And I think it's also because he doesn't want to deal with some of the thinkers on their own terms. He takes them from his own position. And so because of that, he has made what I think are several misstatements about even what the postmodern thinkers are saying. For example, his take on Jacques Derrida, I think, is wrong. Wrong in the sense that I don't agree. I think Jacques Derrida is wrong on several fronts, but I think it's important to understand what he's saying before criticizing him. And so I think that he gets some things wrong. I think also that one of the things he does, and this is something that Steven Pinker does as well, is that what they do is they take the Enlightenment and then they pick their thinkers, the thinkers that they like in the Enlightenment, and then the thinkers that they don't like in the Enlightenment, they call the counter Enlightenment. And then the counter Enlightenment is they just basically trace a line, literally from Kant, which is hilarious, from Kant all the way into the contemporary philosophers, in order to trace what they call postmodernism or the anti-Enlightenment thing. And it's the same. It's like, in my contention about that is that the Enlightenment has certain characteristics, and that those characteristics call for their balance, because they don't seem to fully account for human experience and experience in general. And so what happens is the Enlightenment rationalists, they call the Romantics into being, because we do the irrational aspect of the humanity, right? The aspect which is the desire for adventure, the desire for the strange, the desire for all of this is part of the human person. And so if you just say this good, reason good, reason and science and enlightenment in that sense is good, but then anything else is difficult or a problem, then you run into issues, which is that humans aren't made that way.
Right.
And
that's denial.
yeah, so you end up it's like as if you basically build up a bunch of stuff that you just ignore it. You're like, well, just don't do that, right? The analogy that I've used with Steven Pinker is to say, it's as if you told somebody, all you would need to do all you need to do is stay awake. All you need to do is stay awake. Just stay awake and apply reason all the time. Never ever fall asleep, never get distracted, never have emotions, just be reasonable and follow the process and you'll be fine. But the problem is that, there's a famous representation by Goya, where you see a man on his desk sleeping and there are all these monsters coming out of his mind. And it says, the sleep of reason produces monsters. And that's it. The sleep of reason produces monsters. Which means that's not a statement of judgment. It's not a statement where you're saying, oh no, like the sleep of reason produces monsters. It's like the reason is not an absolute thing. Reason leaves residuals. Reason leaves ambiguous margins, and those margins cannot be completely ignored. And the way to understand it, I think, is that postmodernism, in many ways, many of the postmoderns, they saw that. They saw the power of the margins and the power of the residuals, the power of the things that can't be completely boxed into the categories that the more rationalist types tried to create, and they dove into that and then made those come up. And so,
And so when I was a little kid, and when I grew up and became an adult too, I had an idea that I could plan my own life, that I could make my own decisions, that I could save myself from problems. I had all of that figured out for many, many years, as did my sister. And so this is how we were taught. We went to church when we were very young, and then we stopped going to church. And our parents, it was more my grandparents that were religious, not my parents. So they fell away from the church. They fell away from religion. And so this was kind of like I think maybe I was living with reason. Obviously, I was reasoning everything out, and I thought that was the way forward. But I learned that did not serve me well. That there were moments of depression and anxiety that would be brought up because of something, because I was missing something from my narrative, right? And so you're saying that there was reason, and then postmodernism tried to solve that.
Well, they tried to solve it. They basically noticed that so this is also something that is real, is that there's a relationship between reason, pure reason, and this kind of, especially on almost militarist aspect of reason, right? Where it's like reason colonizes, reason cuts up and makes categories and makes encyclopedias and defines things and creates borders. And so there's a relationship between the rise of Enlightenment thinking and other phenomena which cannot be divided from that Enlightenment thinking, which is the development of nation states and the development of marginal lines, which means that ancient worlds didn't have, they had very few, they had a few, but it was very rare that they would have a marginal line where it's like, this line is where a nation stops, this line is where another nation begins. Usually identities have a buffer in between them. They have a kind of ambiguous space in between two identities. And so this kind of desire toward taxonomy and towards defining and creating barriers and creating nation states, and and also the rise of the state and the rules and all of these things are related to each other. And so you can't just parse it out and say, well, I want Enlightenment reason, but I don't like the fact that the states become these bureaucratic affairs that try to legislate every aspect of reality. It's like these things happen, and they kind of happen where they bounce off each other and they react to each other and everything. But you can't just say that you want one and think that you won't get, let's say, corollaries of these types of behaviors. And so there's a relationship, for example, between Enlightenment, between the nation state, the rise of the taxonomical category, the rise of ethne, for example, the rise of clear ethnic definitions. And so you can't, how can I say this? You can't on the one hand have extreme scientific thinking where you define all these categories with really, with closed sets of identities, and then wonder why those same people came up with ethnic lines that had the same structure, and that you had these ethnies and you had these races in the human world, and that these races were pitted against each other in the same way that the animals were pitted against each other, in the way that is described in Darwin or in other types of very rationalistic thinking. So you can see where that leads, right? It leads into certain directions, and part of which are World War I, World War II, are the fruits of the Enlightenment. And people like Pinker and Hicks will say, well, no, that's the counter Enlightenment. Again, like they just trace in history whatever it is that they like, all the good things, and then all the bad things that are corollaries of their good things, they just say, well, just not that. But like I said, that's not how it works. You can't fight for categorization, extreme categorization in one sphere, in science, and not think that type of attitude and thinking will apply in the human world and in places where you didn't expect the consequences of that, right? Which is to say, it's like, that would lead to something like ethnic cleansing sometimes. And that's what happened at the beginning of the 20th century. We always think of the Holocaust as a singular thing, but the Holocaust was a continuation of a whole slew of things that happened at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th, which is that rational, scientific type thinking identified ethnic boundaries and said, these are the Turks, these are the Greeks, these are the Jews, these are the Germans, these are all these races, and now we have to separate them, because that's what we do. We're scientists. We cut things, we separate things, we isolate phenomena, we do all this stuff. And so before the Holocaust, there were massive ethnic displacements where the Muslims were taken out of India, and then the Greeks were taken out of the Turkish Empire. Then we separated, the Turkish nation and the Greek nation. The Armenians were pushed out of the Turkish Empire, which led to what we call the Armenian genocide, which is that the Armenians had no place to go and they just died in the desert because they were being ethnically cleansed out of the nation. And so these are all the things that postmodernism is reacting against. So you can imagine now the Nazi moment as the height of that, right? The highest point of that, where ethnic identity became so, how can I say this? Like, so purified and like cut with a scalpel that now we have to physically eliminate people that don't fit in that identity. And so like I said, postmodernism is a reaction to that. And if we ignore that, then we don't understand why it is that the idea of fuzzying the borders and of wanting to actually to help people see how identities are not solid, how they tend to be mushy, that's where postmodernism comes from. They're like, well, things aren't as solid as you think, and they say that because they're saying if you have things that are too solid, they're weapons. If you have things that are too closed and too hermetic and too tight, then they become bludgeons to hit against the things that aren't that around it in the human sphere. And
so I get it. So then the postmodernism, it has its purpose. It has its purpose because you can't, if you have these solid lines, you're going to be, the separations are severe. And with postmodernism, they make the separations less severe because they're allowing for differences.
And they make difference the only value.
Right.
Yeah. Which is what happens, and it happens in Jacques Derrida already, where he starts to push for, he tries to take on what he calls logocentrism.
That would be another rational. It would be postmodernism and reason coming together, right? Because it would start to make rigid categories out of the differences.
Well, that's what's weird about our particular moment now, which is that now it's all messed up. It's not now it's weaponized. And so a lot of the people that speak against postmodernism now, they're keen and they understand that in some ways what happened is that some of the postmodern ideas, which were philosophical and were sometimes quite technical in terms of helping you understand the indefinite and how the indefinite cannot be ignored. Like you can't ignore the indefinite aspect of reality. Mm-hmm. But then that became weaponized by just communists, really. A lot of the stuff that's happening now is basically is weaponizing postmodernism simply to undo the current order, and in order to replace it with something akin to a kind of globalist communism. I mean, that's what's happening now. So the fact that people are reacting against postmodernism and some of the ideas that were presented there, I think is completely fair. And I'm not like a fan of the postmoderns, even though I understand why it is that those things happened when they happened. Mm-hmm. I see now that what's happening is there's a kind of weaponization, which is what you said, which is in some ways the weird idea of, instead of just letting the vague be vague, you could say, right? Understanding that on the edge of identities, there's something like the indeterminacy, and that indeterminacy is part of reality, and it has an effect on identities. It tends to make them less solid. It tends to be the place in which those identities can change, and that the indeterminacy is, you could say, the motor for change in general.
Like a dream, right? So a dream.
A question is indeterminate. A question is, what's mm-hmm. this? Mm-hmm. And then you have to answer. So questions are the motor for change. When you notice something that doesn't fit, and then that thing that doesn't fit will force you to change your way of acting or your perspective. This is just like a everyday thing that happens to you all the time. If you're doing something a certain way and then the side effects become too strong, right? Then mm-hmm. at some point that will be the motor for you to change what you're doing. So indeterminacy is the motor for change. It always has been, but now it's radicalized in a way that's weird, because it's not just indeterminacy. It's something like we're trying to name every possible variation of indeterminacy, which is not possible.
It's not possible.
It's an impossible task, but it's almost like in some ways it's being drowned. It's like we're drowning. We're going to drown in identities.
Right. Yes. Right. Yes, because we're going to
It's
take.
weaponized. Right now, it's weaponized. Like people like Jim Lindsay gets it so right. Like he understands what's going on. It's really a form of weaponized indeterminacy in order to take down the order. But behind it is hiding a much more invasive and controlling order than any that we've ever seen.
Let's talk about that order, that very militant order that is coming up. Well, let's talk about, or
Yeah,
maybe we
yeah,
can't
we
talk
can
about
talk
it. I
about
don't
it.
know.
No, it's related to the other part. So, this is something, if people are interested, Jordan, your husband and I, we've written a paper
Mm-hmm.
on subsidiarity and a vision of identity, which tries to explain this problem, which is that, so one of the things that's happening now is that we have this move towards idiosyncrasy, right? We have someone like Justin Trudeau saying diversity is our strength, and saying things like, we don't have an identity. We are a post-national nation. Our only value is openness, basically, is, these types of statements, and so what that ends up doing is, first of all, moving towards a kind of indeterminacy. Obviously, he's saying it himself. We don't have an identity. All we are is open. And so it moves towards indeterminacy, and it also moves towards a type of fragmentation necessarily, because our idiosyncratic identities end up being also self-named, like whatever you identify as, that is more true than anything else. Like the thing that's the most true is whatever you identify as. And so that leads to fragmentation at the bottom of, because usually identity comes from negotiation with the common space, right? It's
Right.
like, I don't decide what I am. I negotiate that with the people around me, and I negotiate that depending on the place where I am, my place in the hierarchies, my place in families, my place in school, my place. That's actually what decides what I am.
Yeah, and
And
and it makes you feel more connected when you do that. It makes you feel less connected. The simpler your identity is, more singular your
yeah.
identity is. Well, then that's postmodernism. It makes you feel alone,
Mm-hmm.
unmoored. Yeah, and so that's what. So then all these kids, or who are identifying like that, are going to feel this aloneness and this uncertainty of where they're standing.
That's right.
Ooh.
And so that basically fragments us, and it fragments us, like you said, into our idiosyncrasies, even inside us, right? So it's like it's like you are your mental illness, right?
Right.
And it's like everybody now has a mental illness. What am I? I'm ADHD. What am I? I am bipolar. What am I? I am. And so everybody is their mental illness. And then at the same time, everybody is their whatever, self-identified uh, gender thing that they can kind of declare. And so you can see what it is, right? It is just this kind of like breaking down of society into its components. It's moving into chaos. But the reality is that when that happens,
Mm-hmm.
you need, for society to continue to exist, these structures have to be filled. Right? Usually the way it used to work is that it's like, I'm an individual in a family, and then there's a hierarchy of order in that family. And then these families, we live in houses, in neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods have a kind of organic reality to them. There'll be like a church, or there'll be a local market, or be all these things that kind of bind us all together. And then that will be included into a city, into church parishes, so there'll be like these scaling hierarchies where all our identities kind of fit together in these little worlds that fit together in bigger worlds, and that scales up into a kind of organic whole, right? It's actually very similar to the way nature works, right? It's
Sounds
this
like
thing.
mountains. It sounds like
Yeah, it's
mountains
similar
coming up.
as the way that it's an organic process. It's basically organically how most systems function. But if you fragment everything, then what's going to happen is something from the top is going to start to fill up all those things. It's going to start to fill up all those normal organic realities that used to exist almost kind of through emergence. And so the government will, so let's say in an ancient world, like the state or the king or the government never felt like families were in competition with them, right? They're just at a lower level. They're doing their thing there, communities, local markets, all these things. But now we have this sense in which now governments and state-like operatives have to take up all the levels of authority that have been given up by people as they move into their own idiosyncrasy. And so you have we in Quebec, we just passed a parental rights law last year where now the state has priority over kids for on top of the parents. So it's like the state has priority and the parents have second priority.
That's
And
within
people,
the school system? Is that
that's
within
in the law. That's the law now.
That's the law.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And
Wow.
everybody's like, well, of course, because the state has to protect children from the parents,
Yeah.
right? Because the child is this idiosyncratic individual that is himself and that is in danger because people are trying to impose authorities on them. And so now we have to free the child from that and make and let it be the most individual possible. But in order to do that, we have to have a state-like power that basically overwhelms all the normal hierarchies and then can basically take your child away if you don't let it self-identify as whatever it wants to self-identify.
So how did that come to be? So where did we make the mistake first? Was it sending them to school? Was it sending them to daycare? Like, was it sending? So we're sending our kids away from the parental care circle and giving the child to a stranger or the public or the government or the city or the community, whoever that is. Oh,
it happened way before that. I mean,
well, maybe
where,
nuclear families, I guess.
yeah. But this is something that, again, now we have to look back and notice that it's inserted into the Enlightenment itself, which is that, the Enlightenment says we are free individuals and we have individual rights. And those individual rights, are God-given. And so you have what ends up happening is that slowly with time, if you see the world that way, at the beginning of the Enlightenment, there are two visions. There's one which is that we're free individuals, and the state has to kind of be as least involved as possible, and we have to be able to kind of reach our free individual desires in order to be happy. And then you have another vision, which is that no, people are crazy and violent and dangerous, and so you need the state to control them. And those two things actually are playing against each other all this time, which is that the more that we move towards the kind of, the rainbow coalition stuff that's happening, that's the end of the Enlightenment, folks. That's where the Enlightenment leads. It leads towards individuals that have rights and that their rights become more and more weird and idiosyncratic, and that they feel more and more in danger from anybody that impedes on their rights. And there's this kind of excess that happens. And at the same time, you have the government that becomes more and more powerful, that is there to protect us from each other, that's there to protect the individual from religion, from families, from all these intermediary community structures. And so you think about it, like the thing is, think about just like all the narratives that you've heard, right, in the past 10 years. It's like the state has to protect the children from coaches because coaches will abuse them. The state has to protect children from priests because priests will abuse them. The state has, and the thing is that it's not that those things don't happen. Of course they happen. Of course abuse happens. But there's a way in which we've set ourselves up in a weird position where we have this story about children have to be protected from abuse, and the people that can do that is the state, and the state just keeps taking up more and more room to protect them from abuse.
So we've become very, very interconnected with social media, so that everybody knows everything about everybody else, depending on how much you post. But people do post a lot of things. So here we are, talking. But that has to happen as well. So so there's two parts to that, right? So here we are trying to talk and make sense of what's going on. But then there's also the other side of the TikTok clip or whatever little clip that's saying, here I am, here's what's happening in my life, respond. They want the world to respond.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to be divorced from that. And especially like young people, say 13-year-old girls
Oh
who,
yeah.
who are, who are aware of that, when they go into that, then they separate themselves from, like you said, family,
Yeah. So
their
you can understand it like
siblings.
the difference between real connection and abstract kind of the difference of connection between you and your brothers and sisters and the messiness of your parents and all that kind of stuff and fighting outside with your friends and get it the kind of stuff that even when we were kids was still possible, where you'd get into a fight in the schoolyard, like these things happen now. These things are almost impossible for them to happen. And
Mm.
so but it happens in this weird new space, which is that the relationship that we're the relationship that we have with others now is more like the relationship of a performer to a public, rather than the relationship of a person to a person in a
Right.
friendship or in a normal relationship. And so we actually treat our relationships as performance and consuming. So I perform on social media, you consume on social media, and that's what happens between my friends. So it's like I post something and then my friends react and then the strangers react and people react, and it is this and so it isolates the person, right? It really isolates the human being, because that's not what a relationship is. Someone liking you on social media, someone, even if it's your friend liking you on TikTok, that is not a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? Relationships aren't made of that stuff. It's not completely outside the world of relationships, but it's not the core of what relationships are.
Well,
uh,
and two, no matter how hard you try to relate to someone online, you're going to have, well, because you're missing the senses, the touch, the
yeah,
smell, all these, all you have an auditory and a visual perception. So you have two senses that you're, and then there's, what is there? There's touch, smell.
yeah, but there's also something like stance and proximity,
Right.
and there's also something like um looking at someone. So like now, right, we're sitting here, I have a camera there, and then
Mm-hmm.
I see myself and I see
Right.
you.
Right.
Very
Mm-hmm.
strange, right? Well, I'm used to it
Yeah.
now, but it's a very strange type of relationship. If we were
Yeah.
sitting in a room,
I wouldn't.
then
Yeah, I wouldn't see myself at all.
no, then I would
Uh-huh.
have to look at you, and then there'd be this normal rhythm of speaking, and then we'd be interrupted, and there'd be there's just this kind of normal rhythm, and then I
Yes,
would
and then the things of the world would attract our attention, which is where you get your insight from.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And then
and
you
it's
would
missing. It's missing.
you would even have, like, we have stances, right? So and it's subtle, right? The way that someone, how far they sit from you,
Mm,
how often, how long they look at you, how long they look away, all these subtle signs that we have of how a relationship is and how the other person feels is something which is not available online, because we try to control. Obviously we don't try, we end up controlling a lot of what is perceived of us. And like you said, there's some like smell, for example. We have no idea,
right.
right? We have no idea to what extent smell is part of our engagement with others,
Well,
because
we
it's
we do know that smell has a lot to do with women and men being sexually attracted, right?
yeah,
So there's that. But who knows how more? Mothers are probably, because mothers, especially when they're pregnant, they have a great sense of smell, and
mm,
that must be to keep themselves out of harm's way. And
mm,
so, yeah. So who knows? All of these cues that we use, uh, and touch as well. Touch And the thing is, it isn't, you don't have, sometimes you don't even have to touch something. You just have to be, like you said, in proximity to something else, and you can feel what's going on. You can feel the vibe of the room, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So all this stuff is missing. So you end up walking into situations that you have no idea about because you don't have enough cues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was Camille Paglia who said that, even because one of the things that happens when you talk to someone, right, is that you mimic their facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
There's this very subtle thing where it's a kind of empathy that you have, where you're
Mm-hmm.
looking and you're kind of engaged in the other person. And that I think it was Camille Paglia who said that she could see, as years went on, how her students had less life in their
Oh,
face. Like they just
geez.
had a kind of neutrality
Oof.
to their expression, and it's because they had less experience just being with people, like in the same room and just hanging out. It's and I see it, like my kids. It seems like it's complicated for them to see their friends. Like, what the hell happened? Like, it's like it's trouble and it's complicated, and they do see their friends. But we used to hang out with our friends all day,
Yeah.
right?
And
We
all
used to
night.
and we just used to be with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was like we just knew where to go. We would go somewhere, we'd hang out, we'd just be there. And at least for a lot of the kids today, that seems to not be possible anymore. It's hard.
I used to sit in my friend's living room till 6 in the morning. Then I'd walk home in the sun, in the
Yeah.
sunrise, at the sunrise. So yeah, you just spent our time together as much as possible.
Yeah. And it's not like that's completely gone, but it's definitely been reduced. Um, Especially for the young ones. Like you go to a school now and you see the friends sitting around together, but texting each other.
Oh, is that right? Yeah,
Oh yeah, well, it happens
probably.
all the time. It happens all the
Yeah, well,
time.
they got to get rid of. They have to get rid of phones in schools. Well, they might
Ah,
have to get rid of schools, but they have to
yeah,
they have to get rid of phones in schools for
it's so
sure.
bad. We tried not to, because we homeschooled our kids for many years, right? You know that, and
Hmm.
we finally, when our house was flooded, we kind of had to put our kids in school because we just couldn't we just couldn't do it, and it was too much. And our kids also even asked her, like, "Look, this isn't working. We need now to go to school." And the first year my daughter went to school, we tried not to let her have a phone, and she was in seventh grade. And at the end of the year, we realized that she had no friends, and we also realized that she couldn't do her homework. She could like didn't do quizzes because the teacher would send them quizzes on their phones in class
Oh
during
wow, really? Wow.
so they'd be like on their phone answering quizzes,
Oh,
and they were getting their homework on their phone.
huh.
And so the teachers are using the phones in a
Oh
way that
yeah.
now, if the kid doesn't have a phone, then they actually can't function in school,
Oh
because
geez,
all
that's
the teachers
terrible.
they're like, "Oh, put your take a picture of your homework, put it up on Google Docs." Everything goes on Google Docs, and they use their Google accounts to manage all their schooling. And so it's
Mm.
really very it makes it difficult, because
Right.
then my youngest daughter, she had a phone when she was in seventh grade, because the teachers basically said she needs a phone or else she can't function.
Oh man. Jonathan Haidt says that kids shouldn't have anything other than maybe a flip phone till they're 18,
Yeah,
right? That
that would
yeah.
definitely be ideal.
Hmm.
But I guess if people can get private schools and then homeschool, then you could probably manage that. But at least here in Quebec, in public schools, you actually literally can't,
I'm going
because
to interview a woman named Sam Sorbo. She was at the ARC conference. Um, she wrote a book called, what's the book called? I'm going to interview her like on Thursday. Let's see. It is, I read it, library. Oh, they're your kids. That's what it's called. They're your
yeah,
kids, right? So she's pretty, she didn't want to homeschool her kids, but she started seeing what was, her husband was an actor. And so they went away for a few months. So then she was teaching the kids. And so then they came home and, well, they'd come home at night and she'd have to do all this work, but what were they learning at school? And it was like, well, they're not really learning that much at school, and I'm teaching them at night. I could just teach them
Yeah, that's
during
right.
the day, and then we wouldn't have to go to school. And so that's what she did. And she
Yeah,
said,
hilarious.
it was so, she said she never thought, she wasn't a teacher or anything, but she said it was the best thing she ever did. And
Yeah.
she's
That's the thing. You're
beating
it's so
that
right.
drum.
Those the 2 hours of homework or whatever that your kids often have to do that the school pushes on you. You could literally do that with your kids during the day, and that'd be enough.
And that'd be enough.
It'd be
Yeah.
enough for their schooling. Like if you did it enough. Like my daughter, she didn't learn to read until she was 10. And everybody was like freaking out. It's like she's late or whatever. And it's like, no, it's just not. They're just wrong about how human beings function. So we just went at her pace, and she learned to read. And when she went into school, she had like a 95% average until now, and she's finishing this year. It's like she basically was at top of her class, but it's just the type of learning that you have organically, where your child is learning things that they love and they're doing it in a loving environment, and they're surrounded by conversation with adults, where they hear conversations that they would never hear if they're in school, only with people their own age. They have to take care of younger people too.
Yes.
They have to deal with younger kids. They have to know how to integrate them, not too much, how to integrate the younger kids, how to deal with older kids, all this stuff that now gets cut away from them when they have these huge classes of children just their age. It's definitely a strong, especially when they're young. I think it's something that is quite, it's really good. Obviously you need a good family. If your family is crumbling and everything is crazy, and you can't, hold your own couple together, or then it's probably not a good idea to homeschool, because you won't. But if you have a good relationship and a good family, then definitely, and you're curious yourself, and you're smart enough, you kind of at least then I think it's better for sure.
Well, I think also, even if your family isn't great, if you can find another couple of families and take 1 day a week each and teach, 10 kids or something.
Yeah, but that might be illegal, so you have to be careful.
That might be illegal. Oh.
Yeah, it might be illegal. Like in some places that is, because you're not, like here in Quebec, you're not allowed to have your kids taught by other parents. You're
I
only
see.
allowed.
No, that would be a bad thing. Yeah.
Or else it's like it becomes like another school, and then they don't like that.
No, you wouldn't want to do
They
that.
really, they're really trying hard here to destroy homeschooling in Quebec. Really hard. They basically now, if your child homeschools, they have to fully submit to the province's curriculum. So you just have to do whatever the province tells you to do. You can't teach them something that is according to their own interests, or you can't you have to just follow their curriculum. And then the only thing that their grade will depend on is like their final exam.
Right.
And the final state exam, if there's a provincial exam at the end, then that's the only thing their grade will depend on.
And what was it like when your kids were homeschooled? How was it different?
I mean, we could do our own thing, and all we needed to do is we needed to get, we were in contact with the Ministry of Education, and they would have someone come over, and we would show them what we're doing. They would get a sense of the different things, different activities the kids are doing, and then they would evaluate. It usually, then at that point, it was mostly just to avoid, because that exists. There are families that homeschool but don't do anything, or don't stimulate the kids. The kids just stay at home playing video games all day. That's obviously not great. That's not what you want for homeschooling.
Yeah.
So they wanted to avoid that, but now it's become much more. Now it's way more severe, and it's kind of sad.
Well, it'll swing this way, and then it'll swing another way.
Let's hope.
And fast, probably too, because things are moving so fast we can hardly keep up.
Yeah, things are quite wild, and like you said, I think COVID was an accelerant, definitely, and a lot of things have changed since then.
I just had a COVID clip. I just got a strike against me on YouTube because I had a Holocaust survivor on my podcast talk about COVID and what she thought of it. And that was enough for them to say, don't you do that.
Did you get a strike, an actual strike?
Yeah, and I'm supposed to take some training. I'm supposed to take training.
Oh, I think I saw that. I think I saw Viva, that guy Viva, like he kind of went through this ridiculous training.
Isn't it? That's a new thing. Huh? It's a new thing now. They have training on YouTube.
And it's so wild. It's like COVID isn't even a thing anymore. And
I
so, but it's
know, I know, but
weird.
you can't say anything about COVID because then that'll interrupt the narrative, won't it?
Yeah. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I said what I had to say about COVID at ARC, and luckily I was in a crowd that reacted positively. I was really worried.
Were
I
you?
was like,
Oh,
nobody talked about COVID during the entire conference. Like we literally just came out of this. So I was like, someone has to mention it. Come on. And so that was part of my. It wasn't the only motivation, but it's part of it. But then I was happy to see people were reacting positively. You know.
yeah. No, yeah. Well, I think Jordan's going to write something about it because for him, Michaela's like, that they don't like you to talk about those things. And George's like, no, no, no. This is important. It's important that we stay vigilant.
Well, we better because last night I went to the grocery store and they had put up new plastic separators between the
Oh,
tills,
really? Mm,
between the self like checkout tills.
yeah.
This is new, and I'm like, they're putting those up now? Really? That's not. That doesn't bode well. It's like everybody's like, all right, we're ready. Let's
Yeah.
go. Bring it up. Let's have another one.
Yeah. No way.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well. What can we,
We'll see.
well, what can we do? We can talk about it.
That's right.
We can be vigilant. We can say, no to these things, and we have to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. For
that's
some
all we
places,
can
it's
do.
easier. It's definitely easier in some places. I think maybe you can just prolong your trip in Arizona or something for a little while.
Well, we're going to
It's
be
really,
down here for a couple of months, and then we're going to tour the States. So, yeah, we are going to be down here for a while.
yeah, that'll
Although we're going
be,
to come home for a couple of weeks in January, so we'll see how that goes.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's hard to know what actually is going to happen,
Yeah.
because the there is a kind of panic. There will be a kind of panic. Next year is election year in the United States, and the liberals in Canada are definitely losing their grip. But fear is a great motivator. Fear is a great thing. It'll
Well, Trudeau's used it before. He likes to use that tactic. So
right,
we'll
and
see what
so
he does.
yeah, we'll see what he does.
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully the Canadians will fight
I
back.
was really, I mean, I was proud of the surprised and proud of the truckers,
Oh,
and
that was brilliant, wasn't it? It was
I mean,
brilliant.
it was really unexpected, and no matter what people say, it definitely moved the needle. It definitely
Yeah.
was one of the reasons why things ended up collapsing so
I was
fast.
like, yay for men and women who were driving trucks and saying what they thought. I thought, good for you. Go.
Yeah, because before the trucker protests here in Quebec, they had suggested that they were going to increase the vaccine passport. Just like a few weeks before, they were saying we're actually going to apply it to grocery stores, and so people won't even be able to get
Wow.
groceries and have them. Yeah,
Wow.
how crazy they were getting. And this was after Omicron. Like this was after everybody had it. Everybody had their
And
little snippet.
survived.
Like exactly, and it didn't matter anymore. It's like that's what I said in my ARC speech, which is that once the thing is gripped, at some point you don't think anymore. It's just like this is it. Like we just move in that direction, and then the truckers really broke that
Mm-hmm.
because it was something.
Yeah, they said no because they were being told that they needed a vaccine to cross the border.
Yeah, but they ended up not solving that problem at the outset, but they definitely did at least force the hand of the provincial governments and the federal government to kind of to tone it down,
Yeah, so
and
we could
so
do that again. That'd be
so
good.
we could do that.
So do you think that postmodernism, it's all through the school system? And I've been reading, there was something called the Common Core uh, educational system in the States where they changed math. So it wasn't just straightforward adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing, they put it in this weird grid that you would use and to figure out your sums and your quotients and things. So they're complicating the basic building blocks of the kids' education, and it looks like it's to destabilize them too, so that they won't know. And they're not teaching like the way we used to do it until they're older. So they're trying to take the little kids and confuse them, right? They're confusing their gender. They're confusing the way that they do basic multiplication and subtraction and things like that.
Yeah, well, you could. The way to understand it is that it's something that isn't completely deliberate and conscious, but it is in some ways this idea ultimately that this is more than now the revolutionary aspect of modernism, right? It's more this idea that so while on the one hand you have this increase of state and this increase of nation and this increase of identity, then you have a kind of globalism that happens at the same time. You have Marxism and kind of fascism that rise up at the same time. And the Marxism is something like all these structures are forms of oppression and that they're forms of tyranny over us. And so there's a sense in which it's almost unconscious, where it's like all structures, all imposed narratives and imposed ways of doing things are oppression and a kind of tyranny. And so that applies ultimately all the way to grammar.
Right.
So, for example, here in Quebec, one of the things that happened is that they started not teaching grammar. They said, we'll teach them grammar when they're older. And so they basically had children write phonetically for years. They'd write phonetically for years until they say, well, later we'll teach them grammar. But it's like, well, because we have to not impede on their individual expression, on their individual development. It all has to be there has to be this like remainder of fluidity. Now, that is the postmodern aspect. But we also it's important to understand that it's reacting against something which is also legitimate, which is that language was never as formal as it has been in the modern age. Language was never, grammar and dictionaries and all this stuff didn't exist, right? There was a tradition and there was a reality, but there was also a kind of organic flexibility to language, which meant that there wasn't like one imposed grammar of English all over the world that never existed until the modern age. Same with French, same with Latin, same with all these other languages. And so the modern age, which it's desired to make everything formal and structured and defined, then created dictionaries and grammars and formalized everything and centralized everything. And that it also has a downside, which is that it's the same even with math. So it has a downside with math too, which is that I learned nothing about math in school. I only was taught formulas. I was like, this is how it works. This is the formula. Apply the formula, apply this, apply that, apply that. But that's also not learning, and so what a lot of these new ways of learning they're trying to say is, well, we want them to understand, but they wouldn't want them just to follow rules, right? Following rules is not useful. We want them to understand, but then they go too far and then they basically create chaos and the children don't learn either. So you need a balance between a kind of, exploratory aspect of learning and a kind of learn it on my own and understand the principles behind things. But then you also have to learn grammar and you have to learn how to do it. You have to learn the rules and the way to apply it. But we're stuck in these extremes.
I think, putting kids back in a situation where they're with older and younger children is probably the way to do that, because they will organically know, like you said, how much information the younger people should have, how much they should include them and how much they should exclude them, so that they learn at a reasonable pace and can take in concepts that make sense to them at the right time.
Yeah, because also one of the things that happens when you have multiple ages is that the older brother, the older sister ends up helping the younger sibling.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great, because then they really have to integrate what they're learning, because they're actually now already teaching it or helping their sibling to assimilate it. And so it's actually the best test. The best test to know if you've learned something is not you doing a test with multiple choice. It's, can you apply it, and can you show someone else, and can you teach it
Right.
back?
Right.
Because
Right.
that's real integration.
Yes. Right. And so that would work. But of course, then people would have to have families to do that. And so that, that's another conversation of people having families and really having kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, like having families,
Yeah.
which I think might be in some parts of society, it's happening. It's
Yeah.
happening that people are saying, the way that we've been doing this about denying our innate desire to be together and have a family, we're not going to deny that anymore.
Yeah.
We're just going to do it, and that's good.
I hope so. I hope that's true.
I hope
There are,
that's true too.
yeah, but there are a lot of, and it's all these pernicious things that they're not completely related to each other, but they're just part of a whole system of thinking that applies itself, which is that it's actually really harder to have kids now than it was, for our grandparents, because, even just think about it, like, okay, so you have 3 kids and they all need booster seats until they're 12 or whatever. And so then by the time you get to 3, then you need a new car.
Yeah, and they have found that the number of kids who were saved by booster seats was lower than the number of people who didn't have a third child. So they stopped people from having a third child because they'd have to buy a new car.
Yeah.
So there was more kids that weren't born than there were kids saved by the car seats.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, who knew that was going to happen? But there it was. And when I was a little kid, I had no car seat, and I used to sit in the back of the car with my binoculars at night and look at the stars, or drive through the Rocky Mountains. And I saw an avalanche one time, just spending hours and hours just looking out the back window with my binoculars. I saw an avalanche in the Rocky Mountains, and people now, they're sitting in the car seats, looking at the seat in front.
Yeah. Now they have a screen. Now they can.
Yeah.
Put
No. Yeah. Right. They have a screen. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. But you can see, like, you can see the same thinking that went into COVID, goes into that type of thinking, which is that, this responsibility of the state is to protect individuals, to protect them from each other, and to protect them from any danger. And as we increase the means to do so, because, that tendency could have been real a few hundred years ago. It could have been real before that. There would have been this desire to do that, but the limited technological physical means would have made it impossible.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I wish I could surveil everybody, and I wish I could know where everybody is, and that I could track anybody that I wanted, but I can't, because, I can't have more of the king's guards than the people in the land. Like, that just doesn't work.
Right.
But
right.
now, because of technological means, we can do that. And so
Yeah.
whatever we do, we have to be more deliberate about it, because we have to understand that the tendency of authority to do that is a normal tendency of authority.
Right.
It's not like it's not just, how can I say that? It's not just like that there are these evil people that just want to control you. It's like, that's the tendency of any authority system, will tend to do that.
So what do we do to fight against it?
I mean, we definitely at least have to be conscious and be more deliberate about it, but I don't know how we can fight it anymore. I mean, it's going to happen. There's no way around it. Like, we're heading towards an authoritarian future. I'm sorry. I don't want to sound, and I know Jordan is he's not on my side on this. Jordan's like, we can do it. We can stop it. We can stop the wave. And I'm like, I don't think we can. I think we have to see what's happening and try to be as truthful and good and loving as we can. But at this point, it's like you cross the American border now, and they basically announce you that, it says, transparency, biometric scanning, biometric measures.
Yeah.
So they know they it's like using biometric measures is the way to go. That's the future. And being able to recognize you from a satellite just by your heartbeat or by your thing, that's the future. Like there's no way around absolute a kind of authoritarian power. I don't see it. So we'll see. Look, pray for the best.
And do you see people fighting against it?
No, I don't think. I don't think it's gonna. I don't think so.
I think so. I think so. Well, I think people are surprising, just like the trucker convoy. I think people are surprising.
Yeah, but the trucker convoy, it was great, and it was it slowed it down, but
it did other things too. I'm talking to a woman on. It might be this Thursday, actually. I'm talking to this woman who was a nurse before the trucker convoy. She was a nurse, and her husband, I can't remember what he does. I think he might have been a writer. Anyway, the things with COVID and the hospitals, and she ended up not wanting to submit to the rules, so she stopped being a nurse, and she ended up being the woman who stood on the platform during the trucker convoy and helping everybody to say what they had to say. Mm-hmm. And so she was very much involved. And I'm going to interview her about that experience to show, because I think, and even I was a massage therapist, right? I spent all my life with one person in a room that was very quiet with melody music, and now I'm talking to people online. I never would have done that. And I'm meeting so many people at that conference too. Didn't you meet lots of people who've changed their lives? Their lives are just nothing like they used to be. So there's change happening. There's a lot of change happening, that people are changing their lives and taking action.
Yeah. Well, it's weird that I'm talking about this in public, but in some ways, this is Jordan and I's difference, which is that when we decided to name it ARC, I was like, I think that's right. I think it's fine. It's weird because in some ways there are two interpretations of ARC. One is the arc in the sense that this is the trajectory, and the other one is also arc in the sense of the boat that will preserve us from the worst. And I think I see it as the second. I see it as people of like mind who understand the dire situation we're in, to come together and to pool their attention, their resources, their intentions towards that something that can to some extent resist what's happening and be a little bulwark and a little microcosm of something real. And that's the way that I see it.
That's going to grow.
Yeah, but I do see the other thing. Like I don't see it like we're going to push back and we're going to stop what's coming, because
well, maybe we can stop. Maybe we can change its trajectory, though.
We'll see.
Maybe we can't stop it, but maybe we can change something about the trajectory.
Yeah. Well,
because it's big. It's big. I mean, it's everywhere. And it's technology, which is something that only a few can take action against.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about what happened at the outset of COVID. At the outset of COVID, the conspiracy theorist said this is moving us towards a digital and biometric identity that will be all consuming and that will be linked to a central digital currency. And it'll be like the Chinese credit system, social credit system. And the people in the media and the people in power just mocked and said, you're idiots. Like you're crazy, insane conspiracy theorists with one hand. And then with the other hand, they do it. And so like by the time we had a Vax Pass in Quebec, it was like, well, of course we have a Vax Pass. It's like, wait a minute. No. A year ago, you told me I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist to say that we're going to have a Vax Pass and that you won't be able to go into a store if you don't show your QR code. and now you're doing it and you're saying it's normal. And so it's like this is all moving towards that, in that direction. And it's crazy that on the one hand they can make fun of people who are saying it's going to happen and do it at the same time. It means that the level of cognitive dissonance that the public has attained is insane.
Right.
Like it's a crazy level of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah,
and that's
for
not
sure.
a good sign. That's not a good sign.
No, it's not a good sign. That's for sure. It's not a good sign.
So, so hopefully, I mean, I pray for the best, and I will. And
Me too.
even I told Jordan, I said, look, in the end, if you think that you can push it back, and I think that we can't, but we need to gather together in a community and an arc. For most of that, we're doing the same activity, and so I'll walk alongside with you, as long as that's true, and we'll do what we have to do.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you have any last words you want to say to me?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't think we were going to go into like the apocalyptic reign.
But of course we are, because that's where we are. That's where we are.
Well, I would say, I mean, I think that in terms of the postmodernism, what I would say to people is to understand, if you want to understand what's happening, you have to understand that identities do have variability on the edge, right? That there is a spectrum, there are spectrums on the edge of identities, and that this is something which is inevitable in the very way in which we make identities, that we shouldn't be surprised that that's the case. And we have to be careful not to try to react to an obsession with the spectrum and with variability and with exception by saying it doesn't exist, right? A good example is when someone says there are only two genders, and their answer is that that's not true. It's just not true. It's just really not true. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions, but the exception doesn't invalidate the rule. The exception doesn't invalidate the reality that there are mostly two genders, and then once in a while there are things that don't quite fit, and that's okay, as long as you understand that they don't invalidate the normality. So we're in danger sometimes, especially in the more kind of conservative world, to react with absolutes to things that actually do that there's only one absolute, right? God is the only absolute. All other things are mitigated goods. We kind of have to see it that way, unless or else we're in danger of fueling the conflict even more by overreacting.
Yeah, but the whole idea of saying that that a mother and a father are the ideal.
That's right.
In a family, and that and everybody is going to fail at that perfection.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there is no ideal. There is an ideal.
That's the right way to go. And
that's
to say,
the right way to go.
We have to be loving and understanding of exceptions, and loving and understanding to the place where we fail to reach the ideal are in ourselves and in others. But it does not remove the ideal. Just like, we believe that telling the truth is good, and everybody lies. Like everybody has lied at least once in their life. So just even the fact that most people do engage in the things that they think are wrong doesn't take the ideal away.
No.
So I think that's what's important. Like you said, is to keep the ideal and to be loving and understanding towards the places where we don't hit the mark.
Yes, amen. That's right.
Yeah.